I never thought I'd watch my quiet suburban life turn into a courtroom circus. One moment, I was just a father fighting to protect my family from a petty HOA. The next, my disabled daughter was lying on the cold courtroom floor. And the woman responsible, the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood, was holding a taser. Trembling with arrogance. What she didn't know was that her moment of power was seconds away from collapsing. Because the person sitting behind that judge's bench wasn't just any. Official it was someone who knew exactly what this Karen had done. And when the truth came out, everything changed. Before everything fell apart. Our neighborhood looked like something out of a real estate brochure. Identical lawns, spotless sidewalks, and neighbors who waved with that perfectly rehearsed suburban smile. My wife and I had bought our house here for the peace and predictability. After years of hospital visits and therapy sessions for our daughter, Emily, we wanted normal. A quiet place where she could roll her wheelchair down the driveway without someone staring or judging. For a while, it felt like we'd finally found that. But peace in a homeowners association never lasts. Ours was ruled by a woman named Carol, though everyone called her Karen behind her back. She was the kind of person who measured grass blades and sent warning letters if your trash bin stayed out for more than 10 minutes. At first, we tried to stay on her good side, nodding politely at meetings, paying every fee, keeping our yard immaculate. It didn't matter. She always found something. It started smaller note about the color of our porch light. Then a complaint about the ramp we installed for Emily, not in accordance with neighborhood aesthetics, she said. I remember laughing it off, thinking no one could actually be that cruel. But Karen didn't laugh. She saw everything as a personal challenge, especially anything that didn't fit her picture-perfect version of the neighborhood. Still, we didn't fight back. We told ourselves she'd get bored and move on to someone else. But when we received a formal violation letter claiming our unauthorized modifications devalued surrounding properties, the illusion of peace cracked. That letter was more than just HOA bureaucracy, was a declaration of war, one we didn't ask for but could no longer ignore. And looking back now, I realized that was the moment our quiet neighborhood stopped feeling like home and started feeling like enemy territory. The first fine came folded neatly inside an envelope taped to our front door. Violation, unauthorized ramp construction. The letterhead had that smug official look, like it was designed to make you feel guilty before you'd even read it. They fined us $250, claiming the wheelchair ramp violated architectural harmony. I remember standing there with the notice in my hand, staring at the ramp that had given Emily her first taste of independence and feeling something twist in my chest. It wasn't about the money, it was about principle. It was about a rule book being used as a weapon. I tried to reason with them. I sent emails, photos, even medical documents proving why the ramp was necessary. Days turned into weeks, and then came another letter, this time for refusal to comply. The fine doubled. Karen copied half the board on her emails, twisting every sentence to sound like we were the neighborhood's biggest problem. According to her, we were creating visual clutter, reducing uniformity, and disrupting community cohesion. All because my daughter needed a safe way to enter her own home. Then came the visits. Not from friends, not from neighbors, but from Karen herself. She'd stand at the edge of our driveway, arms crossed, inspecting the property like she owned it. Once, I caught her taking photos of our front yard at dawn. When I asked her what she was doing, she smirked and said, "Just keeping things in compliance." The audacity of it left me speechless. From that point on, it felt like we were being watched. Every few days, another notice arrived. A complaint about the unauthorized flower pots beside the ramp. A warning about unsightly medical equipment stored in the garage. It was harassment dressed up as procedure. And through it all, Karen made sure to copy the entire neighborhood mailing list on every update. Our private battle was becoming a public humiliation. Emily noticed. She wasn't naive. She saw the way people looked away when we passed them on the sidewalk, the whispered conversations at the mailbox. She started avoiding the front yard altogether. "I don't want to be a problem," she said once, her voice trembling. That broke me. No parent wants their child to feel like their existence is an inconvenience. That night, I promised myself I wouldn't let Karen win. I filed a formal appeal. The board scheduled a hearing not in a neutral setting, but in the HOA's own clubhouse, the same place where Karen ran every meeting. The hearing was supposed to be about finding a resolution, but it felt more like a public trial. Karen sat at the head of the table, surrounded by her hand-picked board members. She didn't even try to hide her smirk as I explained our situation. When I mentioned Emily's condition and the need for accessibility, she interrupted, saying, "We all have to follow the same rules. Exceptions lead to chaos." They voted unanimously to uphold the fine. That was the moment I realized logic wouldn't work. This wasn't about fairness. It was about power, and Karen had built an empire out of it. Soon after, the fines escalated $500, then $750, then a lien threat. The HOA's attorney sent letters full of legal jargon meant to intimidate. Every envelope was a reminder that they could take away everything we'd worked for. And the worst part? They were using our own dues to do it. But if Karen thought she could scare us into submission, she underestimated how far a parent will go for their child. I began documenting everything, every letter, every email, every unannounced visit. I started reading HOA bylaws late at night, looking for inconsistencies, loopholes, anything that could turn the tide. My wife helped, quietly but strategically, reminding me that the best revenge wasn't loud, it was legal. Then came the breaking point. One afternoon, while I was at work, Karen showed up at our house unannounced. Emily was home with her nurse, doing her therapy session in the living room. Karen claimed she was there to inspect ongoing violations, and the nurse told her she couldn't enter without permission. Karen snapped, started shouting about no compliance, about how this kind of behavior would not be tolerated in our community. That's when she saw the camera. I had installed a doorbell cam after her previous visits. It caught everything, her shouting, her threats, the moment she shoved past the nurse and stepped into our home. And then, the unthinkable. When Emily tried to wheel herself forward to ask what was happening, Karen turned, grabbed her taser, and fired. The footage was chaos. Emily crying, the nurse screaming, Karen insisting she was defending herself. My heart stopped when I saw it. That night, we went straight to the police. But here's where things got darker. The officer who took our statement seemed hesitant. He told us Karen had already filed a complaint claiming we had threatened her. She'd twisted the story before we even arrived. That's when I realized how deep her influence ran. Karen wasn't just an HOA president. She was connected politically, socially, maybe even legally. Still, we pressed charges. It became a case of assault and trespassing. The HOA board closed ranks around her, calling it a misunderstanding. They even hosted a meeting to reaffirm community trust, painting us as aggressors who were trying to undermine the HOA. Some neighbors sided with us, but most stayed silent, afraid of becoming Karen's next target. Weeks passed. We received notice of a court hearing. Karen looked calm, almost smug, at the preliminary conference. She clearly believed she'd walk away clean. What she didn't know, what no one in that courtroom knew, was that my wife wasn't just a mother fighting for justice. She was a licensed judge assigned to a nearby district. She'd stayed silent through it all, avoiding any conflict of interest. But fate had other plans. The case was reassigned after a scheduling reshuffle, and when the hearing day came, we walked into the courtroom to find my wife sitting in the judge's chair, her official role undisclosed until that moment. Karen froze the instant she saw her. The same woman she'd mocked at HOA meetings. The same neighbor she'd accused of breaking rules was now presiding over her hearing. The tension in that room was electric. Karen's confidence cracked. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. But that's a story for the climax. Before that day, the neighborhood's hostility reached its peak. Anonymous letters appeared in our mailbox, calling us troublemakers and liars. Someone slashed our tires. A fake notice claiming we'd lost our home circulated online. Each new attack only hardened our resolve. Emily, despite her trauma, told me, "Dad, don't give up. People like her don't stop until someone makes them." And she was right. By the time the court date arrived, I wasn't just defending a ramp anymore. I was defending every family who'd ever been bullied by a system pretending to protect them. I wanted Karen to face consequences not just for what she did to us, but for what she represented: unchecked authority in the hands of the petty and the powerful. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of Emily's medical equipment. I walked out to the ramp, the same one that started it all, and ran my hand along its rail. It wasn't just wood and screws. It was a symbol of everything we'd fought for: dignity, freedom, the right to exist without permission. I remember thinking, tomorrow she'll finally see what it feels like to be powerless. And as the sun rose the next morning, I had no idea just how poetic that justice would be. Because when Karen walked into that courtroom, expecting to dominate the proceedings as usual, she had no clue that the judge waiting for her was the same woman whose family she'd tried to destroy. The courtroom smelled like old paper and nerves. Every sound echoed the shuffle of shoes, the snap of binders opening, the low murmur of lawyers rehearsing their lines. I sat beside Emily, my hand wrapped around hers, feeling the tremor in her fingers. Across the aisle sat Karen, flanked by her attorney and 2 HOA board members. Her posture was confident, almost regal. She truly believed this was going to end with her walking out unscathed. She didn't know what was coming. When the bailiff called for order and the door at the back opened, the room fell silent. My wife entered, dressed in her black robe, eyes steady, expression unreadable. For a moment, Karen didn't recognize her. Then, as my wife took her seat at the bench and adjusted the microphone, realization dawned on her face like a slow-motion disaster. The color drained from Karen's cheeks. She looked between me, Emily, and the bench, confusion flickering into panic. Her attorney whispered something, but she didn't seem to hear him. My wife didn't react. She maintained that calm, judicial composure that had always commanded respect, even from people who didn't know her personally. "This court will now come to order," she said, voice firm but even. The irony was almost poetic. The same woman Karen had accused of undermining the community's standards was now presiding over her case for assault and trespassing. The power dynamic had flipped completely, and for once, Karen couldn't hide behind bylaws or board votes. Here, in this room, there was no committee to protect her, no neighbors to intimidate, just accountability. Karen's attorney, quickly, stood and filed a motion for recusal, claiming potential bias. My wife, anticipating it, addressed it immediately. She'd already disclosed her connection to the case to the higher court, which had approved her as a temporary presiding judge for administrative proceedings. Her involvement was procedural, not personal. This hearing wasn't about sentencing. It was about determining the evidence's validity and admissibility before trial. Karen's smirk faltered. She realized she wasn't getting out of this so easily. When the prosecution played the footage from the doorbell camera, the room went cold. There it was, Karen storming up the driveway, shouting, pushing her way into our home, brandishing her taser like she was enforcing her own personal law. The moment the taser clicked, a sharp gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even the court reporter paused for a second before resuming. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her hand gripping the edge of the table. Her attorney tried to object, claiming the footage lacked context. But context didn't matter. Everyone saw what happened. The jury, the spectators, even the bailiff, they all watched a woman who thought she was untouchable realize that the walls she'd built were crumbling around her. And then came the HOA's turn to speak. The board's representative, a middle-aged man named Paul, who'd always played Karen's loyal shadow, tried to defend her actions. He talked about community safety, about how non-compliant homeowners create hazards. It was the same bureaucratic script we'd been hearing for months, but now it sounded absurd. My wife leaned forward slightly. "Are you suggesting that a child's medical ramp is a safety hazard?" she asked. Her tone wasn't angry, just piercing. Paul stuttered, glanced at Karen, and muttered something about visual cohesion. "Visual cohesion," my wife repeated softly, her gaze steady. "I want that phrase on record." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen avoided eye contact completely, staring at the table as her empire of pettiness collapsed word by word. Then it was my turn to speak. When I took the stand, I didn't talk about the fines or the harassment or even the lies. I talked about Emily, about the days she'd cried because she felt like a burden, about the sleepless nights we'd spent, wondering if we'd lose our home just for trying to make it accessible, about how a community that was supposed to be safe had turned into a battlefield. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of my voice. I could feel eyes on me, some sympathetic, some ashamed. Even Karen's attorney looked uncomfortable. And when I finished, I looked straight at Karen and said, "You wanted to make us invisible, but all you did was expose yourself." For a long moment, no one said a word. Then, slowly, my wife nodded and thanked me for my statement. When it was Karen's turn, she hesitated. For the first time, her confidence faltered completely. Her voice trembled as she tried to explain, claiming she acted in self-defense and feared for her safety. But every word made her sound smaller, weaker. The image she'd built, the all-powerful HOA president, the enforcer of order, was gone. The prosecutor asked one simple question. What exactly were you defending yourself from? A teenage girl in a wheelchair. Karen didn't answer. She just stared at the floor. From that moment, the outcome was inevitable. After a brief recess, the court reconvened. My wife read through the findings with professional precision. Confirming that the evidence was valid, the assault charges would proceed to trial, and that the HOA's bylaws could not supersede state or federal accessibility law. Her tone never wavered, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet strength, a mother's resolve behind the formality. Karen's face hardened. She knew it was over. But even then, she tried one last desperate move. As the session ended, she muttered loudly enough for the room to hear, "This is revenge. This whole thing is personal." My wife didn't even look at her. She simply closed her folder and said, "No, Ms. Andrews, this is accountability." The bailiff's gavel struck once, echoing through the courtroom like the closing of a door that would never reopen for Karen. Outside, the air felt lighter. Emily sat in her chair, staring up at the courthouse steps, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Is it really over?" she asked. "Almost," I said. "But this time, it ends on our terms." In the weeks that followed, word of the case spread through the neighborhood. People who had once avoided us now stopped to talk, offering apologies, even support. The HOA scrambled to rewrite their policies, but the damage was done. Karen's reputation, her entire identity, had crumbled. The woman who ruled our neighborhood like a dictator now avoided her own mailbox. But justice wasn't just about embarrassment. It was about restoration. The ramp stayed, the fines were voided. The lien was lifted. And for the first time in months, Emily felt free to wheel outside again, this time without fear of judgment. As for Karen, her trial loomed ahead. She'd face real consequences now, legal ones, not just social. And though I knew the process would drag on, I also knew she'd never again have the power to hurt another family the way she'd hurt ours. Sometimes, justice doesn't come in loud victories. Sometimes, it arrives quietly in the echo of a gavel, the calm of a mother's steady voice, and the realization that bullies only win when you stay silent. That day in court marked the end of her reign, but not the end of the story. Because what happened afterward changed the entire neighborhood forever. And as I stood outside that courthouse, watching Karen walk past us, eyes down, shoulders hunched, I couldn't help but wonder, what do people like her see when the mirror finally shows them the truth? After that day in court, silence fell over the neighborhood. Not the peaceful kind we'd once dreamed of, but a tense, uncertain quiet, the kind that comes after a storm, when everyone's still checking the damage and wondering what's left standing. For weeks, no one spoke openly about what had happened. The HOA newsletter went dark. The weekly emails stopped. The Facebook group, usually flooded with petty posts about paint colors and lawn lengths, turned eerily empty. Even the people who used to glare at us when we drove by now looked away, not out of disdain, but out of guilt. They'd watched the harassment happen in plain sight. And now they couldn't pretend they hadn't. Karen tried to hold on to her position at first. She sent out one last message to the entire community, a rambling, defensive letter about unfounded accusations and selective editing. But it was too late. The footage had already circulated. The court documents were public record. Everyone knew. Her words, once sharp enough to wound, had lost all power. Within a month, she resigned as HOA president. Officially, she claimed it was for health reasons. Unofficially, she couldn't stand the stairs anymore. The board held a special election to fill her seat. For the first time since we'd moved in, the meeting was packed, not out of obligation, but out of interest. People who had once stayed quiet now spoke up about their own experiences. Fines that made no sense, notices written in anger, threats veiled as community standards. It was like a dam breaking. Years of silent frustration poured out into that room. I didn't run for a position, but I watched as the neighbors voted for new leadership, reasonable people who wanted change. One of them, an older man named George, stood and said something I'll never forget. Rules are supposed to protect people, not control them. It was simple, but it hit everyone in that room. Because that's what the HOA had forgotten, that behind every line of text in those covenants were real families, real lives. After the new board took over, things began to shift. They reviewed every outdated regulation, starting with accessibility. They introduced what they called the Emily Amendment, a clause that guaranteed no homeowner could ever be fined or penalized for medical accommodations or accessibility modifications. It was small, but to us, it meant everything. I remember the first time the amendment passed. The vote was unanimous. When George announced it, the room broke into applause. My wife squeezed my hand under the table, and Emily, sitting proudly beside us, smiled wider than I'd seen in months. For once, our home didn't feel like enemy territory. It felt like part of something good again. But the changes didn't stop there. The neighborhood began to feel alive in a way it hadn't before. People started talking, not whispering. We hosted small get-togethers, potlucks, even accessibility fundraisers for local kids who needed ramps or equipment. The same driveways that once divided us now connected us. And then something unexpected happened. Families from nearby communities reached out after seeing the news coverage. Some had gone through the same thing: bullying HOAs, unfair fines, disability discrimination, but had been too afraid to speak up. Emily became somewhat of a local symbol, not by choice, but by strength. Her story gave people courage to stand their ground. She was invited to share her experience at a local civic forum. Watching her on stage, her small hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair, her voice steady as she said, "Accessibility isn't privilege, it's humanity." I felt a pride I can't describe. That moment made every sleepless night, every court hearing, every ounce of stress worth it. Meanwhile, Karen disappeared from the community's daily life. Her trial moved forward, quietly, but inevitably. We didn't attend the final hearing. We didn't need to. The footage and testimonies spoke for themselves. She was found guilty of misdemeanor assault and trespassing, ordered to pay fines, complete anger management counseling, and issue a formal apology. The day that letter arrived, her signed apology, I stared at it for a long time before opening it. It wasn't emotional or heartfelt. It was short, legal, perfunctory. But it didn't matter. The point wasn't her remorse. The point was that she'd been held accountable, and the system she'd once used as her shield had turned against her. Sometimes justice doesn't look like fireworks. Sometimes it's just a piece of paper, quietly closing a chapter you thought would never end. Months passed, and life slowly found its rhythm again. Emily began spending more time outdoors. She planted flowers at the edge of the ramp, bright yellow daisies that caught the morning light. The same neighbors who once complained about that ramp now stopped to compliment it. One even offered to repaint his own porch to match ours. And yet, the scars of what happened never fully faded. There were days when I'd catch myself glancing out the window, half expecting another violation notice to appear on the door. My wife still avoided HOA meetings when she could, though she kept an eye on their progress from a distance. Trauma doesn't just vanish. It lingers quietly, like the hum of an old electric wire, invisible but always there. Still, we moved forward. Because that's what you do when life hands you chaos. You rebuild one careful step at a time. A year later, we hosted the neighborhood's first ever Accessibility Awareness Day. It wasn't grand, just a few tents, local food trucks, and a ramp building demo. But it symbolized something bigger. Change, born out of confrontation. People laughed, kids played, and Emily rolled through the crowd like she owned the place. In that moment, it truly felt like home again. Every so often, I think about Karen. I wonder if she ever understood what drove her to that level of control. Was it pride, fear, or just a desperate need to matter in a place that measured worth by property lines? Whatever it was, it destroyed her and nearly destroyed us. But in her downfall, something beautiful grew. Community, empathy, understanding. Sometimes the worst people bring out the best in others, not because they intend to, but because their cruelty forces us to define what we will and will not tolerate. Looking back now, I realize that our fight was never just about a ramp. It was about boundaries, not the ones drawn on a map, but the ones that separate decency from dominance, community from control. It's strange to think how much power a single structure of wood and metal came to represent. That ramp started as a necessity, became a battleground, and ended as a monument to resilience. When I see Emily glide down it now, sunlight on her hair, laughter echoing through the yard, I know we did something right. We didn't just win against a person, we won against a mindset. And if there's one lesson I've taken from all of this, it's that silence protects bullies more than rules ever could. The moment you speak up, the moment you decide that peace isn't worth the price of submission, that's when real change begins. Karen's story became a cautionary tale whispered at HOA meetings across the county. Not about power, but about its limits. About how easily it crumbles when faced with truth. Ours became a reminder that homes aren't just structures. They're sanctuaries. And no committee, no bylaw, no self-appointed enforcer should ever have the power to take that away. The neighborhood looks the same from the outside, neatly trimmed lawns, Identical mailboxes, that familiar rhythm of suburban order. But beneath the surface, it's different, kinder, more self-aware. There's a new rule posted on the community board now. Every resident deserves respect, safety, and access without exception. It's simple, but it's everything. As for us, we're finally at peace. My wife continues her judicial work, though she's become a quiet advocate for accessibility rights in housing law. Emily's thriving, stronger than ever, her confidence unshakable, and me. I still walk past that ramp every morning, running my hand along the railing like a reminder that sometimes the smallest fights carry the biggest meaning. People often ask if I've forgiven Karen. The truth is, forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from their shadow. And I have. Completely. Because the best revenge was never the courtroom, never the headlines, never her resignation. The best revenge was reclaiming our peace and making sure no one else would ever have to fight the same battle again. So if you're watching this and living through your own version of HOA hell, remember this: they only win if you give up. Document everything. Stand your ground. Tell your story. Because one voice, even from a single home on a quiet street, can change an entire community. And sometimes, that's all it takes.